talked about yesterday. She's been in the three design professions. She's been doing urban planning, she's been doing landscape architecture, and she's been doing also architecture. While in Rome, one of his big projects is the crematorium of the city of Rome. Then she came to she taught at the University de la Sapienza in Rome, and then she came to the United States, where she taught with Stanley Tigerman at the University of Illinois, worked with Helmut Young in Chicago, and currently teaches at the Arts Institute of Chicago. The last big project she did is a presentation for the Triennale exhibit in Milano for the school, no? And hope you're going to show us some of this work today. Thank you, and welcome and joining.
Since I was born, I was looking for the dark side of the moon, I think so. On the right, you can see one Roman cistern that is in Chieti. I was born in Chieti, actually, and I did pass all my life in Rome. And you have to think of that as a container of water. It doesn't work like this. You can never see one cistern of water empty like this. But and I would like with my playtime when I was a little girl. And I would like to challenge with this image. Can you believe that we are constructing our memory, which we have newborns, and that for our life, finding out, keeping what we have to do, what we have to select for our life, and keep growing with our memory and redefining symbols of architecture. I really do trust that this can be really connected with this kind of memory that I did construct when I was a child. But I'm not really completely sure if the language is one result of a communication with the outside world or not. Really, in 1981, when I did construct this building connected with the idea of the dead, I did bump in one kind of philosophy of life and philosophy that at that time construction, because that was for me the real challenge for my life as an architect, and in that one for me the real challenge for my book as an architect. And in 1910, I did bump in another proof, one brief sample, and inventing, working on samples, in other words, and legitimating it with new rules in the games of paradox, and legitimating it with new rules in the games of reasoning. Now, with new rules in the games of reasoning. Now, this is what I did in the games of reasoning. Now, this is what I did establish, that language is of solution with this language, but for this kind of architecture. What I want to discuss with you is just for this kind of architecture. What I want to discuss with you is just this example of architecture is a very strong one, based on deformation and perspective. The idea of the deformation of the space, the idea of selecting one point of view to construct our philosophy of life and our reason to be in life with our architecture is a very difficult one. So the main answer of this project is being symmetrical. As you can see on the right, you do have the plan, and in here you do have the central vision of this architecture. But let's see what is happening when you get out of this center, see? You do conquer another space, another time, you do conquer another point of view. The solution of this kind of gallery covered with transparent material is that the weight of this material is not connected with the ground, see? It's just going to be connected on this kind of very subtle wall of concrete, reinforced concrete. In there you can see the garden. You can see the spoiled structure of this crematory being in there alone against the sky. And when you have to walk on this walkway just in the center of the court of this crematorium, you have to be alone. It's only 100 a meter 20 centimeters. It's a little more than 3 feet. Changing the point of view, destroying again the idea of the symmetrical building. As soon as you get out of that ramp, you do have the sensation that you are really flying in a technological space and in one machinery. This is really destroying what is left out of our life. You have to deal at this point with distortion of architecture. So if you put your eye on the bottom of that ramp, what you can see is just in here on my left. You can put your eye in there and you can see the gallery as a flat gallery. You can't have the perception that that is such a construction with 23 degrees of slope on the horizontal line. Changing argument. This is one image from Identification of a Woman. It's a film from Antonioni. I have been working with deformation. I have been working with shadows and with perspective. This is the reason because I did like to read in that kind of photographic image what is not in there, what is only in my mind, what is only a convention, an attribution of significance. You can see the grain of the wood on the right hand. You can't really have any perception about buildings looking in the right image. What you can see is a bookshelf, and the bookshelf is empty, and the bookshelf does have only only a shell showing the grain of the wood, the light, the point of where the light, where is the source of the light. On the left hand, you do have another story. You can't even reconnect the first image on the right with the left. So what we do express, I really think, is the map of our mind. In this case, it's substantial and very clear. This has been exposed, this work, for a long time. I don't have the original work in here. Now we are in Rome. This is the Tevere, Lungo Tevere. So we do have this blonde river crossing the city, and has been in life for so many years, crossing this beautiful town with any kind of material. And you can see the rest of the antique taberne here on the left. And this is one commissioner work from the municipality in Rome, because let's see the other slides in here. All this system of church that you do have on the right are really falling very slowly inside the Tiber. And we do have up in there Santa Maria del Priorato. I think that you know very well Piranesi, and Santa Alessia, Santa Sabina, Giardino degli Aranci, and we do have any kind of documentation about those beautiful, wonderful churches that we do have up on the cliff in there. And since all this system is falling down slowly into the Tiber, they did ask to some architects to sketch something, hopefully one machine, one architectural machine that is going to hold up all the cliff that is almost empty, because the antique taberne are really fulfilling all the inner space of this cliff with empty space. So you can walk inside the mountain for hundreds of meters, and you can never find the bottom of the construction, because they did really construct a storage for thousands and thousands of tons. Now, another point that is very strong in the philosophy of thinking is one point of view that I did pick up in Logic der Forschung from Karl Popper. And Karl Popper has been working to the demonstration that our knowledge is the progression of attempts and progressive elimination of errors and mistakes. In other words, we do simulate a reality. We do find the assumptions. We do make some definitions. And we do find the boundaries of the problem, we do establish the regulations, and the pristine difference between the scientific growth and the pre-scientific one is the fact that at scientific level we are conscious of our search for the error, and that is the thing to eliminate. This is the problem that is presenting itself when we do select a style. So, which style we are going to select now is not postmodernism, maybe it's deconstructivism, maybe it's classical, maybe it's in between those languages, but who knows? And who is going to legitimate the purity and the value of one style or another style? Who is going to put the finger inside this problem? What is good and what is bad in architecture? Well, let's discuss with a very critical eye the proposition of this work. This is one out of 1,000 of possibilities that we should propose to hold one cliff like this in Rome. For example, Vitruvius and Leon Battista Alberti said that every good architect must first make a machine to do architecture. So you have to measure yourself with being able to making one machine, because everybody needs a machine. Just think at your day. Think when you do wake up in the morning. Think at how many machineries are you touching. Giulio Camillo was one opponent of Palladio in the 17th century, for example, and he has been constructing one machine for the King of France. Was one Louis something, and translating the model of the universe inside a very small machine. And the King of France did walk toward this machine and said, Giulio, I do understand everything about how the universe is functioning right now. The same day, the machine did disappear, and Giulio Camillo as well. This is only to show you, don't lose the possibility to experience new ways on architecture. Just accept the challenge and go on. And be never sure that that is the best result. Go for research forever. On the right, we do have a Duperac drawing of 1577 showing us what was almost a cliff at that time. As you can see, the Roman construction is still up. And I did see this drawing after I did draw this, because they are very much similar. So I did not pick up the idea of the old Roman construction to construct my fake castle, because you know very much that this is fake, because this is a machine to hold the cliff. It's not something being constructed because it's beautiful. It should be an attraction as well, because this construction is facing the other side of Rome, that is fantastic view, and is just telling very much about the story of the city and the presence of the absence, because you can feel under your feet when you walk in Rome that you do have at least 8, 9 type of textures. This is the central part. As you can see on the top, on the sketch, on that drawing that I do call sketch, you do have one staircase crisscrossing the cliff, because it's the most rigid form that we can propose to hold the mountain in there. The plan of this construction is a diagram. It doesn't have anything to do with the fascination of the colors, with the dialogue with the city, because it has to work as a machine, it has to be rigid, it has to cantilever the entire cliff. I was back studying the idea of the tower because I have been proposing this fake tower for a long time, and the presence of this tower is an obsessive presence in my architecture. As you can see on the right, I have been working very much for a long time in town planning and generating little buildings as well, but the situation of the urbanistic side in Europe and in Italy in particular is a very difficult one, because we are going on constructing planning with the theory of subtracting soil to the map. So we do originate this kind of beautiful map, putting together all the pieces of land that we have to study, and then we do subtract after bite by bite the soil, because we can't touch the forest, we can't touch so many parts of the land, because we do have something underneath. So they have maybe one day going to excavate and to find the old tissue of the soil. And there is a lot of things that we can't really do in Italy. We can't construct high-rise buildings. We can't use any kind of material. You have to forgive, for example, the transparent materials, because we do have one problem with the power, and we are not generating power and electricity ourselves. So most of the time it's the municipality selecting the materials for you, and you have to stay with those kind of regulations, and this is what is happening when you have to deal with the regulations. This is a minimal house. It's one house for 2 families. And if you can see on the right, this was really constructed with a garden outside, because everybody wants a little pool, everybody wants its own roof, everybody wants the garage and so forth, and a little garden with the cultivation of vegetables. And everybody wants to cultivate its own garlic in Italy. And so this is what is happening almost. You have to separate the buildings, and you have almost to feel in line with the textures of the city, so you can't really isolate the buildings. And look at the diagram of the plan on the right. It's something that is very simple, a little more than a box, because it has to be really cheap in this case. The roof is required. The amount of windows are really a requirement. The dimension of the car garage is required. Dimension of the garden outside is something that is fixed already, and the dimension of the kitchen and the dimension of the bathroom and so forth. And dealing with those forced laws, this is what is happening. The presence of the tower is still in there, the courtyard is still in there, and I did work in this case with the idea of the cube. And on the left here you do have the sketch of those little buildings. On the right you can see what is happening on the garden. We do jump now in another dimension. Rome is one kind of strange city. As soon as you get out of the center, you are really feeling lost, because with all those impossibilities, we do have no housing available. If you want to find one home in Rome, it's almost impossible. You can't even find a hall where to stay. So they have been constructing any kind of wild construction during the night just for shelter for a long time, and they did occupy a lot of kilometers between Rome and the water. It did happen that all those wild constructions did afterward need of a sanatory, because of problems regarding the construction of roads and hospitals and services and schools, and you can imagine all of that, because they were only sheltered and so forth. So this project in here for Massimina and Massimilla, as you can see on the right, you can see hundreds of little squares, and those are the houses constructed during the night. And if you are going in there, don't expect good architecture. They do pick up any kind of material they can find outside and inside the other buildings. And with all this funny collection, they do construct a shelter. And so this is the intervention of the municipality and the government to find out what is a public space for those people, trying to occupy the land that is not already taken. And this is what is happening when you try to fix a garden with schools and pavilions on the center of this kind of chaotic situation. I did want to jump in a small scale right now. This is one small city near Rome. It's very close to Rome. It's 30 kilometers at north. And it's a small volcanic lake in there. And they did want to fix this little land looking at the lake, looking at the water. And they did call for a town planning and regulations because before they do start any kind of building, they need of regulations. So I did work out the town planning and planning of the countryside, and then little constructions all around like this. This is the section of the lake that you did see on the previous slide, and they did want connections between the hinterland and the lake with very small construction, whispering construction, not very big buildings, almost little pavilions, little fountains, and ramps for reach the lake. And this is what they did propose, and this is what they have been constructing after the town planning. This is a working drawing. On the right you can see a show of water looking at the lake. And when I'm speaking about small theater and small show of water, I'm talking about 4 meters long. So it's a very small building. You have to think that 1 meter is almost 3 feet. So this is the dimension that you can touch working in such a small city. So it's really something human scale. And after this, you can see that following the shape of the trees, you have to follow everything that is dictated from the nature in this case, because you can't really escape the presence of the nature in here. Those trees are almost 150 years old, so you have to stay with that and try to not disturb too much. This kind of stone that they do use in Rome and all around in Latium is called San Pietrino. It's very hard stone that they do cut in conical shapes, and they do fix on a soft soil, so they won't really move because they are giving a lot of pressure and tension one against the other one, and they do fulfill the edges with cement and reinforced concrete. This is the place, and I have been living in here for 8 years long, and you can see on the right one little pavilion that is part of this whispering construction near the lake. Some sketches, because they just called me for another building for 2 families, and I won't really to present to you this dilemma that I have been living with. The basic idea of our Western science is that you have not to take into account the falling of a leaf on some planet in another galaxy when you are trying to account for the motion of a ball on this system. So you do have a small ball to move inside this system, so you don't consider what is happening up in the sky. And this has been really a great dilemma for me. Is this truth or not? What do you think about this? The new theory of chaos really is touching this kind of dilemma. So before I start a construction, should I make some indage? Should I make some analysis about what is the typological construction of this kind of buildings? Or should I consider something else? Or should I go inside the building with one sort of electric intuition and sensation? I guess we have to stay with the both because we can't eliminate our sensations, but I still do think that we have to consider that the butterfly effect is still in life. In other words, if one butterfly is flying in here, after a few hours, something else is going to happen in New York or on the other side of the world, because we do have an addition of phenomenons. This is the reason because I didn't stop my research in here, and I did grow up with something else that I want to show you later. This is 100 home house for two families that I think you do have on the show. Same regulations that I did present you, so no way you can't escape. You can't make a glass building. You can't really use reinforced concrete, and you have to stay with bricks and stone. And it came out really very beautiful. And this has been published several times because the separation between the two homes is a double wall. So it's a real separation, as you can see on the right on section BB. This is a construction of a garden using this kind of shell with the repetition of an echo of historical buildings. As you can see on the right, that is one little garden on the center of a small town in the south of Italy. And on the left, you do have this kind of proposition of elements that we can use to construct that kind of garden. They did want one system of water falling down, and the places was really very small, so this is the only symmetrical proposition that we could do at that time. And I want to show you the working drawings because at that time we were really very much involved with using the hand and pen and being day and night on the drafting table, so you don't have any lettering from mechanical lettering. You do have all made by hand, brick by brick, stone by stone, and all the lettering is like just the pleasure to draw, not only the sensation to making a project, but also taking care of the composition of the working drawings. I really can't stop talking about the small dimension and the big dimension. So I can construct one small element for a garden like this. And on the right, you can see a high-rise building. You can be really sure that this can be constructed. It's not only a sketch, but when you do have an architectural background, usually you are really able to manipulate the reality and to transform such a sketch in a real architecture. The anamorphosis that has been really very close to my brain forever since I did start drawing and perspective the formation of the buildings is also in here in the sketch and in the drawing that I did propose for Venice in 1985 in the same Biennale di Venezia from United States. The architects did bring a lot of machines. Machines made out of wood, of screws, of singular elements, but they were not really made to work. They were really machine working for itself. So we did have Daniel Libeskind, for example, presenting 3 machines, reading machine and working machine. They were really made out of screws, made by hand, night by night. They did work like monks during the night without electrical life, helping themselves with tools made by hand. And in Europe, did happen that we were working the machine, but still consistent with the style, with the classical style, even helping ourselves with the contradiction of one city like Venice. So you do have, for example, in here, the right part of the bridge is not equal to the left part, even if they are symmetrical parts of this building. This is almost the last part of my research following this deformation in architecture, and those are the new sketches that I did construct a few months ago. On the right you do have the plan of the bridge of Venice, Accademia Bridge. On the right you do have the sketches that are just the follow-up of that form that you can see on the plan of the bridge. Now I want to come back a little bit to this consideration. I can see that building in this grain of wood, and I want really to have the sensation that from the small scale to the big scale, from the town planning to the small scale of an object, there is no big difference, because everything can be a social issue, everything is a political issue, and our understanding of the life is a political one, it's a choice. I have been also asked a few months ago to write the outline of one system of teaching that I'm really following up right now. And what I want to present you is this not linear sequence of points that I'm following right now. I have been jumping from one definition to another, from one description to another definition. And now I'm going back to this kind of system of points that I do use in order to teach. It's a not linear sequence, so you can even reverse this kind of system to the mirror, and it's going to function as well. The first thing that I would like to discuss with you is constructing or deconstructing the position of the observer in this architecture world. Because if you do trust that 1 + 1 is equal to, as soon as you get out of that mathematical system, it's not truth anymore. So you can even have the assumption that 1 + 1 is equal 1, and it's going to work as well because you do have another assumption. The second point is losing the position of the object outside, because every kind of story we can tell about our projects, or every kind of story we can tell about the others, is going to be a reconstruction made out of our mind, so it's an interpretation of our brain. So I guess that the position of the object outside ourselves is completely lost, and this is almost the main part of the weak thought that is having place in Europe right now. Is the most important philosophical issue that we are going to discuss. The other part that I really like to touch every time I do discuss things either with myself or with other people outside is the concept of typology, because the repetition of the same element is very important. In here you do have single elements. This is the fractal cube that has been exposed from France in Milano Triennale. On the right you do have one object that I did construct a few months ago, and also that is a fake architecture based on a strong perspective point. The concept of modernity is something that we should discuss also, and what is the validity of the process of the project. So, for example, I made that structure on the right on 1981, and in here on the left you do have one composition of a very young student that has got the bachelor a few months ago. She's back in Korea right now, and she has been picking up some elements for Malevich from the Russian constructivism, and she does have the legitimation to do this, even if we can't really borrow from the past, because we are recreating the reality day by day. And this is again the fractal cube on the right, and on the left you do have the model of this architecture, and as you can see all around you do have a dark shadow, and that is a real shadow. So she has been collapsing the shadow of the building, selecting 12 points of positions of the sunlight, and she did draw all the shadows all together, and they are becoming part of the building. Now I want to discuss with you if we are legitimated to do something like this or not. If we do have the legitimation to consider this real architecture, or if we have to pick up the archetypes of modernity, the columns and the bins and something like that. Even deconstructing a snowflake, this work is also in the exhibition of Milano, this one on the left. Deconstructing a snowflake doesn't mean anything else than constructing a snowflake, because you have to understand what is the inner structure of the hexagon of the snowflakes. And this is what is the result of this analysis of the snow. It's a watermark building. The building is actually fluctuating inside the water, so you can have half of the construction inside, as you can see on the right. And if you are sitting in that transparent room, you can see either under the water or outside in the sky. And this is the model of this Lara Furness did construct for this building. Another landmark building on the left, a watermark building on the right. Both of them are my students, and both of those works are in Milano Triennale. The idea was the image about the structure of the nature. And in here you can see on the left the structure of the flying fish, and on the right you do have repeated all over the series of Fibonacci, so the natural series of numbers that you can find in the nature. The relativity and the concept of space-time also is the threshold of the balance is entering very much in this kind of architecture, because you have to measure yourself, you have to challenge every time with the balance, because with this pencil structure you have to hold a very big pavilion. On the right you do have the philosophical issues that dictate this kind of construction, so you can see the analysis of the wing of the flying fish, and on the left you do have the first stage. I hope that the drawing is enough readable, because it's a very interesting one. You do have any kind of deformation using the perspective and the axonometric view. Every step of this work is measured from mathematical issue. So you can even prove every kind of step with this kind of method. Again, back to the concept, and this is the final conclusion of the research that this student Kurt Andernach did. Is from Germany, is living in Chicago, frequenting School of the Arts, is an undergraduate student. This is one work from Melita Ristovska, and this is the translation from the Umberto Eco book, The Gallery of Lavoisier, Foucault's Pendulum. I hope you did read this book, because it's fulfilled with any kind of information about connections between life and poetry and science and religion and politics. This work is really one proof of itself, because if you put the word if before you start any kind of project, you can find the legitimation of anything you are doing, unless it's a superficial project. So if you start with a few elements and you start legitimating one language that you can take from one book, for example, one page of a scientific book, or one page of poetry, or one page of mathematical logic, you do assume that you can translate this language into another meta-language, and this meta-language for ourselves is the language of architecture, nothing else. I don't know how many of you can recognize architecture in this very nice, beautiful, outstanding work, but I do do invite you to see architecture inside this work, because this is nothing else than sections and elevations and plans of a building explained through lines and colors and black and white devices that they are going to explain how the reflection is working when you do have a curved mirror. The idea of Stephen Hawking about the time and space reversing inside itself and the theory of black holes was the background of this work. This is another graduate student. She's go back in Korea as well. And as you can see on the diagram down in there on the right, you can see the diagram of the growth of a human being. So when you start grow up, the growth is going like this, and then you do establish some one point of balance with the outside, and you can translate this language inside the other one, the technical language inside the language of architecture and space, as well as you can maybe find the mathematical code in one piece of music of Johann Sebastian Bach, and begin to translate this inside architecture. This is what is happening on the left in here. So this kind of strange territory, this kind of strange building has been dictated from the decomposition and reconstruction of the music of Johann Sebastian Bach with an analytical method and with a scientific method. So, and here you do have the work of the cello and the violin, and you do have a few models about the reconstruction of the music and translation inside the building. For what concerns the nature, for example, you can see on the left one picture of a grasshopper, one part of the grasshopper again, and taking this as a living structure, you can translate this in another building that you can see on the right. That is another landmark building that I did construct in one of the courses of the School of the Art Institute. And as you can see, it's just a grasshopper, nothing else than this grasshopper, but it's really working very well. The structure is a very sophisticated one. We are again to the idea of the fractals when we do look at that kind of architecture. It's the perfect imperfection of the nature. And here you can see a fragment of a leaf. And this is going to be the last part of my research. So I'm very much working at this kind of repetition of elements, deconstructing elements, and going back eventually to the classical life, and making dialogues with the future, and working in a bridge between science and art and architecture and social issues. Thank you very much for your attention. I did want to confuse you because today is the 1st of April, so you do have a lot of inputs, but I didn't finish the lecture. I did begin at least 6 kind of speeches. I didn't finish any one of them. We can finish this with a wonderful conversation right now if you want. I'm open to any kind of discussion. And here we do have Eric and Melita Ristovska that you saw on the slides up in there. So if you want to share and some time with them and to ask questions, we are really open to any kind of redefinition of the history and redefinition of meaning of architecture. Thank you very much. Switch the light on, please. Can we have some light here? I'm feeling very good because I did legitimate the photo. Carlos is talking about something. Maybe you want to hear about this. It's just Just asking, how do you feel about the crematorium, the building that you did construct in 1981, and about this new research? I'm not feeling detached at all. I'm feeling almost on the track. I'm feeling that I'm speaking almost architecture in that case and in this case. I'm feeling very open to any kind of field. I'm feeling that we can select our kind of philosophical thinking as well as language of architecture. Are you enough confused? Any question? You have any question? Any simple, very simple question so I can answer back? Well, thank you.